February 27, 1942. Above the black waters of the English Channel, the belly of a Whitley bomber vibrates like a steel drum in a storm. Wind claws at the open jump door. Below, hidden under a moon smothered by clouds, lies the French coastline and a secret the Allies are desperate to steal. Sergeant Jack Nissenthal stands among the tightly packed paratroopers of No. 1 Parachute Brigade, his hands wrapped around the static line as the red jump light bathes the interior in blood-colored glow. Every man can feel the weight of what sits on the ground beneath them. The German Würzburg radar, a dish-shaped machine that has been guiding Luftwaffe night fighters with uncanny accuracy. If Britain can learn how it works, it can learn how to defeat it. The aircraft bucks in turbulence. Someone mutters a prayer. Another man tightens his grip on his Sten gun. In the corner, Flight Lieutenant Charles Pickard, the mission's air commander, leans forward, scanning the horizon for the faint shape of the French cliffs. The interior reeks of fuel, damp wool, and adrenaline. You can almost hear their thoughts: get in, grab the radar, get out. All in under 30 minutes. The pilot calls back over the intercom, his voice strained. Approaching drop zone. Nissenthal swallows hard. The man is no ordinary paratrooper. As a specialist radar technician from RAF Telecommunications Research Establishment, he is the only one who truly understands what the team is dropping in to steal. And because of his importance, orders are clear. If he is about to be captured, his escort must shoot him rather than allow the Germans to interrogate him. The green light snaps on. Wind screams into the fuselage as the first man disappears into darkness. Then another. Boots thud against the metal flooring as each commando shuffles forward. The channel is an invisible void beneath them, and the coast beyond is darker still, occupied France in the dead of winter. Nissenthal leaps. The shock of cold air slams into him instantly. His parachute snaps open with a violent crack and yanks him upward. For a moment, he's alone in the night, floating, drifting, suspended above the world like a condemned man awaiting judgment. Then shapes appear around him, the silhouettes of fellow commandos descending in silent formation. Below, the French countryside stretches out in patterns of blackened fields and pale ribbons of moonlit frost. The distant line of cliffs hugs the shoreline, and nestled just inland is their target, the German radar installation at Bruneval. The drop is rough. Several men hit the ground hard, rolling through frozen soil. Equipment bags thump down beside them. Lieutenant John Frost, the operations ground commander, gathers his men quickly, his breath glowing in the frigid air. Rally up, move. The paratroopers fan out across the field, cutting free from their chutes, forming into squads with practiced efficiency. Every second counts. The German sentries at the radar site might be dozing in their bunkers now, but once the shooting starts, they won't stay asleep long. In the distance, Nissenthal can just make out the radar dish, a pale, spectral shape rising from its concrete pit like a giant mechanical ear listening to the night sky. He knows what its signals mean. Every sweep of that dish guides bombers into deadly ambushes. Every pulse tells the Luftwaffe exactly where to strike. Tonight they will steal its secrets. Frost crouches, checking the luminous dial of his watch. Teams advance. The commandos move. Through the darkness, they trot low and fast, Sten guns ready, wool coats brushing against frosted undergrowth, demolition charges secured at their hips. Their boots crunch softly on frozen earth. Ahead, faint lights glow from German barracks and the main radar hut. The smell of the sea drifts in, salt, cold, raw. They reach the edge of a hedgerow. A dog barks somewhere in the compound. A German voice calls out briefly, annoyed, half asleep, but nothing stirs. Frost raises his hand. This is it. The first assault team creeps toward the barracks, preparing to eliminate the sentries before any alarm can be raised. Another group moves toward the beach, where Royal Navy landing craft will later extract them. Nissenthal stays close behind Frost. His job is about to begin, and the fate of Britain's aerial war hangs on what he will find inside the radar installation. A flare hisses faintly in the distance over the channel, one of their aircraft signaling the all-clear. Frost whispers, "Stand by." The commandos take their positions, hearts pounding, fingers on triggers. In less than 2 minutes, the quiet French coastline is going to explode into violence. Lieutenant John Frost's hand slices downward. A muffled thud breaks the stillness as Corporal Bernie's squad smashes through the barracks door. The explosion of noise is immediate, shouts in German, the scrape of boots, the clatter of bunks tipping over. Sten guns spit short, controlled bursts. Flashing muzzle fire illuminates stunned faces inside the cramped wooden building. Within seconds, the German garrison is down. A single guard manages to fire a wild shot through a window before collapsing. The bullet cracks into the night, echoing off the cliffs. Silence returns, but only briefly. Frost doesn't wait. Move, take the radar building. The second assault team rushes the radar hut. The structure is squat, concrete, humming faintly with the electrical throb of its machinery. The paratroopers sprint low, shadows darting between tufts of dune grass. As they approach, a German technician inside opens the door, perhaps sensing something wrong. He freezes. Private Tony Hamilton is on him instantly, tackling him to the ground before he can yell. Two commandos drag the man back inside, binding him and shoving a rag into his mouth. The interior glows with eerie red instrument lights, oscilloscopes dancing with traces of incoming echoes from the channel. A radio crackles faintly on a nearby shelf. Outside, Nesenthal arrives with his escort, two men assigned to him with absolute final orders. If capture seems imminent, they are to kill him rather than allow the Germans to learn who he is or what he knows. The grim weight of that reality has stalked him all the way from Britain. He steps into the radar hut. The room feels alive, hot, cramped, buzzing. The great Würzburg radar control console stands at the center like a mechanical altar. Dials, switches, tuning knobs, glowing cathode displays. This is the heart of the enemy's night fighting system. This is what London sent him for. Frost's men secure the building while Nesenthal drops to his knees beside the main control cabinet. He snaps open a canvas bag filled with tools from RAF Signal's toolkit. Screwdrivers, pliers, wire cutters, they clink softly as he spreads them across the floor. 5 minutes, Frost warns him from the doorway. After that, we may have every German from here to Le Havre on top of us. Nesenthal doesn't look up. He's already unscrewing the faceplate, exposing the circuitry within. The warm smell of dust and ozone rushes out. This machine, for all its menace, is beautifully engineered. He whispers measurements under his breath, snapping off components, labeling them with grease pencil, stuffing them into padded pouches. Outside, the crack of rifles erupts. A German patrol has stumbled onto the scene. Frost curses, hold them back. The commandos spread out along the perimeter, dropping behind hastily chosen firing positions. Tracer fire streaks across the night like red-hot needles. A machine gun team sets up near the hedgerow, its barrel warming quickly. The Germans fire back from the dunes, their shouted orders rising above the surf. Inside the hut, Nesenthal works faster. He rips out a frequency modulation module, the most critical piece, and hands it off to his escort. Don't lose that, he warns, it's the whole game. A blast rocks the ground. Frost kicks open the door, shouting over the gunfire, you have 30 seconds. Nesenthal yanks free a final panel, cutting through a mess of wires. Sparks spit. The radar dish outside suddenly powers down, its motor whining to a stop. The whole facility plunges deeper into darkness. He slams his toolkit shut. Done, let's go. Frost yells, extraction team, fall back to the beach, now. The commandos retreat in tight formation, hauling their captured equipment. German bullets stitch the sand around them as they sprint toward the cliff path leading down to the extraction zone. Flares burst overhead, turning the beach white as bone. A German machine gun opens up from the far ridge. Frost orders his men to lay suppressive fire. Nesenthal stays low behind a rock outcrop, clutching the precious radar components to his chest. He can hear the German voices getting closer, climbing over the hedgerow they had crossed just minutes earlier. Then a distant mechanical roar. Out on the water, shapes emerge through the surf. The approaching landing craft of the Royal Navy, engines throttled high, bow waves cutting through the darkness. Searchlights flicker to life on one of the boats, sweeping over the beach to signal their position. Go down the path, Frost commands. The commandos begin descending the steep, narrow steps carved into the cliff face, slipping on frost, sliding on loose gravel. Above them, German rifle flashes flicker like lightning. A bullet zings past Nesenthal's ear. Another hits the rocks inches from his hand, showering him with stone splinters. But below, salvation waits in the form of armed sailors shouting for them to jump. 30 minutes have passed since the first shot. The raid is nearly complete, if they can survive the final sprint. The cliff path is barely more than a goat trail twisting downward toward the moonlit surf. Frost leads the way, shouting for his men to stay low, stay fast, stay alive. Behind him, the paratroopers descend in staggered groups, boots slipping on frost, fingers scraping against cold stone as they steady themselves. Above, the Germans have recovered from the shock of the initial assault. Rifle cracks echo from the rim of the cliff. Muzzle flashes flicker like sparks torn from the darkness. Chunks of limestone burst from the wall as bullets smack inches from the retreating commandos. Nesenthal grips the precious radar components to his chest as he fights to keep his footing. The bag feels heavier with every step, as if the captured secrets themselves resist being carried away. Halfway down, a tracer round arcs overhead like a glowing red whip. It slashes past Lieutenant Frost's shoulder and sizzles into the sea below. He doesn't slow. "Keep moving," he roars, "they'll have heavier guns on us in minutes." At the rear, the covering fire team digs in just long enough to keep the Germans pinned. Corporal Fraser orders his men to lay down short, brutal bursts before following the others down the narrow path. Their Sten guns chatter rhythmically, each burst echoing over the roar of the surf. The landing craft are close now, gray silhouettes bucking in the foam. The Royal Navy coxswains shout through cupped hands, engines snarling as they jockey the boats into the tight inlet between the cliffs. One sailor signals frantically with a hooded lamp. Behind the first row of boats, another silhouette waits, a frigate from No. 12 Commandos Naval Support Flotilla, its deck guns scanning the shoreline for threats. The wind carries the Germans' voices down the cliff. They're close, too close. Frost reaches the base of the steps and leaps onto wet sand, waving his men forward. "Straight to the boats, don't stop." The commandos break into a sprint. Nesenthal runs with them, boots sinking into the soft sand, breath burning in his lungs. His escort flanks him tightly, hands hovering near their sidearms, grimly ready to carry out their impossible orders if capture becomes imminent. From the cliff top, a burst of automatic fire rips down toward the beach. The sailors open up in response. Vickers' machine guns mounted on the landing craft roar to life, hurling long ribbons of tracer fire that rake the cliff line. Sparks erupt from the rocks as bullets chew into German positions. Sand explodes around the commandos as they dash the last few meters. A sailor reaches out. "Jump!" Frost grabs the gunwale and hauls himself aboard the nearest boat. Men tumble in behind him, some crawling, some diving headlong. The craft rocks violently under their combined weight. Nesenthal is next. He throws the equipment bag first, two sailors catch it between them, then leaps, fingers scraping the icy metal edge as hands grab his webbing and yank him aboard. His escort jumps in right behind him. But the last group is still exposed on the sand. German flares burst overhead, turning the scene into a harsh white glare. The cliff transforms into jagged black silhouettes. Every man on the beach is suddenly visible, every shadow, every movement. From the top of the cliff, a German MG-34 opens fire. Bullets spray across the beach in sweeping arcs. One commando goes down, his comrades dragging him by the collar as they sprint for the final boat. Frost jumps back toward the gunwale, shouting for the sailors to cover them. The landing craft nearest the fire pivots sharply. Its bow gunner squeezes the trigger, the heavy machine gun thunders, spitting tracer lines straight into the ridge. The German machine gunner jerks backward as the position erupts in a spray of stone and dust. Last four get in now. The final commandos dive aboard. A sailor slams the throttle forward. The landing craft lurches away from the beach just as another burst of enemy fire lashes the surf behind them. Clear, Frost shouts toward the coxswain, take us out. Engines roar. The boats pull away from the shoreline, bouncing over the waves. German rounds splash into the water, some whizzing overhead, others falling short as distance widens between attackers and the escaping raiders. Nisenthal collapses against the metal bulkhead, panting, soaked, and trembling with cold and adrenaline. Beside him lies the canvas bag of radar components, small pieces of metal and circuitry that might change the entire fate of Britain's air war. Frost kneels next to him, catching his breath. "That's it, Jack, you've got your prize." He claps him on the shoulder. "Now let's get you home." Behind them, the cliffs of Bruneval shrink into the darkness. The German searchlights sweep frantically across the shoreline, too late, too far, their beams searching for ghosts. The sea carries the commandos toward the waiting ships and the knowledge that the most dangerous part of the mission is behind them, though the consequences of what they've stolen are only beginning. Spray lashes across the bow as the landing craft punch through the dark swells of the channel. Engines roar at full throttle, their vibrations running through the steel decks and into the boots of every exhausted commando aboard. The wind carries the smell of fuel and cordite, and beneath it, the faint metallic tang of the stolen radar components lying wrapped in canvas at Sergeant Jack Nisenthal's feet. Lieutenant Frost stands beside the coxswain, gripping a railing as the craft slams into another wave. His face, lit by the dim glow of a hooded lamp, is streaked with sea spray and soot. Behind them, the French coastline is already fading into a faint line, no longer a threat but a memory of gunfire, cliffs, and narrow escape. Nisenthal slumps against the bulkhead, peeling off his wet gloves with shaking hands. His escort, now at ease for the first time, settles opposite him, rifles resting on their knees. A sailor offers Nisenthal a tin mug of something steaming. He takes it gratefully. The heat bites his fingers, spreading warmth through his numb hands. "Any damage?" Frost calls over the engine noise, pointing to the canvas bag. Nisenthal shakes his head. "No, everything's intact. We have the modulation board, the switch unit, the signal amplifier, everything we need to understand how the Germans track our bombers." A sailor whistles low, "All that from that little gadget." Nisenthal manages a tired smile. Sometimes the smallest pieces of war make the biggest difference. In the distance, low shapes appear on the water, waiting escort vessels, dark against the restless sea. One of them is the British destroyer HMS Fernie, running without lights, her silhouette only barely visible until a signal lamp blinks 3 rapid flashes. The landing craft alter course toward her. As they approach, a scramble net cascades down Fernie's side. Sailors lean over the rails, shouting encouragement as the commandos begin climbing up, one by one, boots slipping on the wet rope. Frost goes first, then the wounded, then Nisenthal with his precious cargo strapped across his chest. His escort climbs directly behind him, still instinctively guarding their charge. Once aboard, the destroyer's deck feels like solid ground, even as the ship rolls beneath them. Officers hurry the men toward the warmth of the mess deck where blankets, hot tea, and incredulous stares await. Word spreads quickly. They got it. All of it. In 30 minutes. Stories grow between breaths of the fight in the barracks, the dash down the cliffs, the hail of machine gun fire. Sailors clap the commandos on the back, shaking their heads in disbelief. But for Nisenthal, the adrenaline is wearing off, leaving only exhaustion and the weight of what comes next. An officer from Naval Intelligence approaches him, nodding toward the bag. "Sir, we have orders to secure that and transport you directly to the analysts as soon as we dock." Nisenthal nods numbly. He'd expected nothing less. The fate of thousands of aircrews might rest on what he has carried from France. Hours later, HMS Fernie slices through the channel, her bow cutting clean white arcs in the moonlit water. The shoreline of Britain grows slowly on the horizon, a comforting silhouette of safety and home. But inside the wardroom, the atmosphere is tense, almost electric. Nisenthal spreads the radar components across a long table under bright lamps. Officers crowd around him as he explains each piece, its purpose, its placement, the secrets it doesn't want to give up. The modulation board gleams under the lights, delicate coils and capacitors arranged with German precision. "See this tuning assembly?" he says, pointing to a curved metal plate. "It tells us exactly what wavelength the Germans are using. Once we know that, we can jam it." A lieutenant mutters, "And once we jam it, our bombers stop flying blindly into ambushes." Another officer nods toward the amplifier unit. "What about that?" Nisenthal lifts it gently. "This is how they sharpen their image on aircraft. If we can disrupt this signal, their fighters won't see a thing." The room falls silent. For the first time, the men truly understand the magnitude of what the raiding party has done. Above them, the ship's engines throttle down as Fernie approaches her berth at Portsmouth Harbor. Lights from the dockside shimmer across the water. Ambulance crews wait to take the wounded. Intelligence officers stand by with sealed crates to transport the radar components under heavy guard. The commandos gather their equipment, tired but triumphant. Frost checks on each of his men, pride visible in his eyes despite his exhaustion. As Nisenthal prepares to disembark, Frost steps beside him. "You did it, Jack," he says quietly. "You got the heart of their system. The Boffins will be singing your praises for years." Nisenthal shakes his head. "We all did it, and if this helps bring our boys home, then it was worth every second." The gangway drops. Cold British air floods the deck, sharp and clean and entirely unlike the occupied coast they left behind. The commandos file down, their boots clanging on the metal steps. Nisenthal follows, the canvas bag still secured in his arms like a newborn. Behind him, the ship's siren sounds, a long, mournful note that rolls across the dark water and out into the night. The raid is over. The real work is about to begin. By dawn, the captured components from Bruneval are already en route by secure convoy to the sprawling research campus of Bawdsey Research Station on the Suffolk coast. The winter fog hangs low over the coastline as technicians in long coats and thick scarves hurry through the corridors, summoned from their beds the moment the operation succeeded. Inside a converted manor house overlooking the Grey Sea, Britain's top scientific minds gather around a cleared workbench. Oscilloscopes hum softly, soldering irons glow, engineers shuffle blueprints, adjusting their spectacles as they inspect the priceless German circuitry laid out under surgical lamps. Nisenthal, still wearing his paratrooper smock, boots muddy and uniform torn, stands among them, providing the battlefield-to-laboratory translation only he can offer. Dr. Alan Butement, one of Britain's leading radar physicists, leans over the Würzburg's modulation board, his breath fogging the cold air in the room. "Beautiful design," he murmurs. "Compact, efficient, but not without its flaws." "How so?" Nisenthal asks, rubbing tired eyes. Butement taps a finger against a tuning coil. "Here, the frequency stability is impressive but overly dependent on this single assembly. If we disrupt this harmonic, just this one, then the whole system loses coherence." Another scientist, Professor Bowen, runs a hand through disheveled hair. "We might be able to blind them entirely, or better yet, make them see aircraft where none exist." The room hums with sudden excitement. A technician rushes in with a tray of fresh components. Another brings in a chalkboard covered in hastily scrawled waveforms, some circled, some crossed out. Papers scatter as the scientists dive deeper into the German design. "This," Butement says, lifting the amplifier unit Nisenthal tore from its mount during the raid, "is what allows the Würzburg to track range so accurately. We've never known how they stabilized the return signal." He holds it up, turning it in the light. "But now we do." Nisenthal leans forward. "Can we jam it?" "Better," Bowen replies, "we can spoof it." A ripple of murmured approval spreads through the room. Meanwhile, in a corner, two officers from RAF Bomber Command listen with growing interest. One, a group captain with a face lined by sleepless nights, nods slowly. If this works, our boys will stop being slaughtered on the approach to the Ruhr, he says. The night fighters rely on these dishes, blind them, and we get through. Nisenthal feels a weight lift from his shoulders. He didn't just risk his life for scraps of metal, he risked it for a lifeline. A junior engineer begins carefully unwinding one of the captured coils, tracing its input path. No wonder the Germans are so confident, he says. They think this design is untouchable. Bowen straightens, and now we'll prove them wrong. They spend the next several hours dismantling, cataloging, sketching, and reverse engineering every captured fragment. Every circuit is photographed. Every resonance peak is measured. Every diode is tested. By mid-afternoon, the first experimental countermeasures begin to take shape, devices based on a new concept the lab has tinkered with for months but never fully realized: airborne jamming. Nisenthal watches as a prototype jammer, no larger than a suitcase, is wired to mimic the Würzburg's operational frequency. Thick cables snake across the floor toward a test rig supporting the German amplifier. Powering up, a technician calls. The machine emits a rising hum. The captured amplifier unit flickers, wavers, and then, under the influence of the jamming beam, its carefully tuned signal collapses into useless noise. The room erupts with cheers. Butement grins at Nisenthal. Thanks to you, we can blind every Würzburg in France. Outside the laboratory windows, the cold sea crashes against the cliffs, oblivious to the breakthrough occurring within the walls of the old estate. But inside, the energy is palpable, like they've cracked the enemy's code, taken apart its eyes, and found a way to shut them forever. An RAF intelligence officer steps forward, clearing his throat. Once we scale this up, every bomber group will be equipped with counter-Würzburg devices. The Germans won't know what happened. They'll think their equipment is malfunctioning. Nisenthal nods slowly, absorbing the enormity of it. The pieces he ripped from that quiet French radar station are now the key to a new phase of the air war. A phase where British bombers will no longer fly blind into German traps. A clerk enters with a sealed folder stamped top secret. He hands it to Bowen. The Air Ministry wants a full briefing within 48 hours, Bowen says. We'll need all hands. Nisenthal's escort steps forward. Sir, you're wanted in London. Headquarters needs your first-hand account. Nisenthal allows himself a small, weary smile. Of course they do. The scientists continue working as he steps out into the cold afternoon air. The sky above is streaked with thin rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds, quiet, pale, but unmistakably hopeful. For the first time in months, British radar experts hold the advantage. Because of one raid. One night. 30 minutes of chaos on a French cliff. And everything has changed. Dawn breaks cold and brittle over the French coastline. At the radar station outside Bruneval, German soldiers pick through the wreckage left behind by the British raiders. The one-sprout Würzburg dish hangs at an unnatural angle, its feed horn smashed, its control hut stripped bare of key components. Bullet holes scar the barracks. The sand near the cliffs is churned with footprints leading toward the sea, evidence of a clean, disciplined extraction. But the most startling discovery, reported within the hour to Coastal Command headquarters, is this. Nothing of value appears to be missing. Not to the Germans, at least. Major Kremer of the Luftnachrichten Regiment kneels in the radar hut, inspecting the empty metal slots, the dangling wires. He presses a gloved hand against the open casing of the control panel, staring into the dark void where the modulation board should be. Sabotage? Asks a junior technician nervously. No, Kremer mutters, if it were sabotage, the equipment would be destroyed, not removed. He stands slowly, turning in the cramped space, taking in the signs. Screws neatly taken out. Panels gently placed aside, nothing smashed except what the raiders needed to break. Tools had been used, careful hands, not chaotic destruction. Kremer feels a chill. They knew exactly what to take. A silence hangs in the air, heavy, suffocating. Hours later, at a command post inland, a heated meeting unfolds. Officers from the Luftwaffe, Wehrmacht, and Radar Command gather around a map, tempers flaring. A single question keeps returning like a thorn that no one can extract. How did the British know which components were important? A communications officer slams a fist on the table. It must have been an inside source, a traitor. Another scoffs, impossible, the design is top secret. A third proposes the obvious fear. Perhaps they understand more about radar than we believed. That suggestion is quickly shouted down. German confidence in their radar superiority is too great, too carefully cultivated by their engineers and commanders. But beneath the bravado, cracks appear. Reports pour in from other Würzburg sites along the channel. Some operators claim their sets are behaving strangely. Others admit, quietly, that they never fully understood every part of the technology they were operating. The complexity of the Würzburg system means very few technicians have the expertise to determine what has been taken or how critical it is. A colonel from Radar Command finally speaks, rubbing his temples. We cannot let Berlin know the full extent of this. The room stills. He chooses his words carefully. We will characterize it as a minor raid, a temporary disruption. Replacement parts will be manufactured immediately. He taps the table. We will not admit that critical technology has been stolen. The decision is made. Official reports sent to Berlin describe the incident as a hit-and-run assault with minimal loss of equipment. The radar is listed as operational within days. No mention is made of missing panels, no acknowledgement of intellectual theft. It's a lie. But it's a comfortable lie. For a while. Behind closed doors, though, a different picture emerges. Engineers tasked with rebuilding the Bruneval radar quickly realize the implications. Whole assemblies must be redesigned, recalibrated, reinstalled. Some components rely on custom manufacturing facilities already stretched thin. Others require skilled technicians pulled from the front lines. As days pass, senior officers grow increasingly uneasy. What if the British learned the Würzburg's operating wavelength? What if they learned its vulnerabilities? What if they could jam it? Still, the German command clings to denial. It is easier to believe the British stole nothing significant, easier to imagine the Würzburg as invulnerable, untouchable. The truth settles in slowly, like frost creeping across a window. A single missing board. A single missing amplifier. One cleanly disassembled radar set. It gnaws at them. By week's end, anxieties harden into quiet panic. In Berlin, senior Luftwaffe officers gather for an emergency review of radar defenses along the Channel and northern France. They examine diagrams of the Würzburg. They question the degree to which the system has been compromised. They speak in hushed tones about operational security and technical continuity. But never, never do they openly admit that the Allies might now understand the Würzburg better than some of Germany's own technicians. Meanwhile, miles away at airbases across occupied France, operators begin to notice strange distortions on their radar screens. Fleeting anomalies, ghost echoes, blips that appear for a moment and vanish without explanation. At first, these disturbances are blamed on atmospheric interference. Then on operator errors. Then on faulty maintenance. No one wants to utter the words forming in the back of their minds. The British are doing something. But as the nights pass, the anomalies grow more frequent. By the end of spring, one thing is clear to the radar operators who spend long, lonely hours watching their scopes. The Würzburg is no longer infallible. Something has changed since the raid at Bruneval. Something the British stole. Something that is now coming back to haunt the Luftwaffe. And Germany, though not yet fully aware, has lost the advantage for good. April 1942. Night settles over the runways of RAF Herne, where bombers crouch in the darkness like steel predators awaiting release. Ground crews move between them with handheld lamps hooded in blue filters, checking fuel lines, loading flares, tightening bolts that rattle under the weight of turbulence and flak. But tonight, something else is being loaded onto the aircraft, something secret, something new. In a small hangar at the edge of the airfield, technicians from the telecommunications research establishment work furiously to install the first operational German radar jammers. The devices, barely tested outside the laboratory, hum with a strange pulsing rhythm, synchronized perfectly to the range frequencies discovered in the captured Würzburg components from Bruneval. A senior TRE engineer wipes grease from his hands. These should create enough false echoes to overwhelm the Würzburg displays for several minutes, he says, tapping a metal casing bolted under the fuselage of a Wellington bomber. The bomber's pilot, Flight Lieutenant Harris, raises an eyebrow. Several minutes, that's all. The engineer smiles tiredly. Several minutes is an eternity when someone is trying to kill you. Nisenthal stands nearby, watching the installation with a quiet, solemn pride. He's still wearing a bandage on his forearm from Bruneval. Since his debriefings in London, he spent every waking moment working with the scientists who turned Germany's radar advantage into its Achilles heel. Now he gets to see the results being armed and aimed back at the enemy. Harris pats the jammer's metal casing. If this keeps Jerry's night fighters off our backs, I'll buy you a pint for the rest of my life. Nisenthal chuckles, just get home in one piece, that'll do. At 22:00 hours, engines roar across the airfield. The first wave of bombers thunders down the runway and into the night, carrying bombs in their bays and invisible electronic weapons humming beneath their wings. Within an hour, the formation crosses the French coast. Inside a Luftwaffe radar bunker near Dieppe, an operator leans toward his Würzburg screen. The return signals look normal, clear, sharp, precise. He adjusts a dial, monitoring the sweep. Then, a flicker. A sudden bloom of noise. A cluster of phantom echoes. The operator frowns. Was does he adjusts the gain. The blips multiply. He checks another dial. More blips. More noise. The clarity of the returning signals disintegrates into a storm of false targets. He calls to his lieutenant, "Sir, the set is malfunctioning." The officer hurries over, irritation in his voice. "Nonsense, calibrate." But calibration makes it worse. What once was a stable, dependable image now looks like a swarm of angry fireflies. Up in the night sky, Harris's Wellington passes safely across the radar's search arc. The jammer hums steadily, pouring deception into the German detection network. Inside the bomber's cockpit, Harris checks his altimeter. Navigator, confirm coast crossing. Confirmed, no pursuit, no radar locks. The crew exchange glances, half disbelief, half exhilaration. They are passing through airspace that once felt like a death trap, now quiet, blind, unaware. As the bomber streams inland toward the Ruhr, more German radar sites report failures. Technicians frantically swap tubes and shout orders. Officers demand explanations that no one can give. Reset the circuit. It's not the circuit, look. Where are the targets? This can't be atmospheric interference. Würzburg stations that normally guide night fighters into perfect ambush vectors now feed pilots contradictory data, ghost returns, false bearings, vanishing contacts. Controllers bark instructions that send fighters scrambling in the wrong direction. Bombers that once suffered devastating losses slip through gaps like water through broken hands. In the early hours before dawn, the British formation returns across the Channel. Only a fraction of the losses expected. Fewer burned-out engines, fewer missing aircraft. The RAF ground crews wait anxiously as the bombers descend onto the runways one by one. Lanterns bob, medics rush to meet the first crews. Officers stand with clipboards tallying arrivals. Harris's Wellington touches down smoothly. He climbs out of the cockpit, pulling off his helmet with a grin. No night fighters, not a single lock-on. A crowd gathers as word spreads. Other pilots report the same thing. They couldn't track us. The radar was blind. Jerry's eyes were shut tonight. Behind them, Nisenthal stands completely still, absorbing every word. his breath fogs in the night air. It worked. The gamble, the raid, the deadly sprint down the cliffs, the analysis in cold laboratories, it all culminated in this moment. The RAF has finally struck back, not with brute force but with knowledge, with stolen secrets, with a precise counterblow the Germans never saw coming. Reports from the night's success travel fast. By sunrise, Air Ministry officials in London are already crafting new doctrines for electronic warfare. Engineers return to their benches to refine the jammers. Intelligence officers compile lists of additional German radar sites for potential raids. For the first time in the long, bitter air war, British commanders glimpse a future where the Luftwaffe cannot see them coming. And it all began with 30 minutes of violence on a dark French cliff. May 1942. Across occupied Europe, the Luftwaffe's radar crews begin to dread the night shift. In a bunker outside Calais, a Würzburg operator wipes sweat from his brow as his scope dissolves, again into a blizzard of meaningless blips. Behind him, the duty officer paces furiously, barking orders that become more desperate with every sweep of the radar dish overhead. Recalibrate, switch to auxiliary gain, reset the sweep motor. Sir, nothing is responding, the operator insists. Outside, the radar's dish rotates smoothly under the starlight, sleek, silent, powerful, but inside the bunker the system is effectively blind. The range gates jitter uncontrollably. The signal amplifiers fluctuate. The return trace looks less like aircraft profiles and more like the aurora borealis. And every time British bombers cross the coast, the chaos worsens. Farther inland, in a command center near Lille, a Luftwaffe controller slams his fist on the table. "Where are the targets? We had them 5 minutes ago." A junior officer studies the flickering screen. "Sir, the contacts fragmented, then vanished entirely." Vanished bombers do not vanish. But tonight they do. Meanwhile in Britain, a quiet revolution spreads across airfields from Yorkshire to the Midlands. Jammers based on Nicenthal's stolen circuitry, now codenamed Airborne Grocer and Mandrel, are being installed in increasing numbers. Some are mounted in bombers. Others are placed in specially modified aircraft whose sole mission is to confuse, deceive, and distort Nazi radar coverage. Inside a briefing room at RAF Waddington, crews gather around a wall-sized map marked with arcs representing known German radar ranges. Intelligence officers use sticks to point at each sector. "You'll fly here," an officer says, tapping a gap just north of Dunkirk. "This corridor has reliably collapsed under jamming every night for the past week. If it holds again, you'll have a clean run into Essen." A pilot at the back raises a hand, and if it does. The officer doesn't smile, then expect night fighters within 10 minutes. The room goes quiet. Nicenthal enters then, tired, uniform rumpled, chalk dust on his sleeves from the countless diagrams he's been drawing for aircrews. Conversations pause as he moves forward. "This is working," he says plainly. "The Germans are struggling, their operators think their sets are malfunctioning, their technicians think their amplifiers are faulty, their officers, well, they're blaming everyone but themselves." A ripple of chuckles passes through the crews. Nicenthal continues, pointing to the map. "Your jammers create false echoes right here on the Würzburg's primary tracking wavelength. Once the clutter overwhelms their amplifiers, their dish tries to compensate. That's when the return signal collapses entirely." A young navigator blinks in surprise, "So they can't see us at all." Nicenthal nods slowly. "Not unless you fly right over their heads at treetop level, and even then their readings will be delayed or distorted." The crews absorb this with a mixture of relief and awe. For once, the odds feel tilted, however slightly, in their favor. Across the channel, the Germans scramble to adapt. Field reports pile up. Some radar technicians insist the interference is natural, whether atmospheric ducts, solar flares. Others suspect new British technology but lack proof. A few whisper darker theories that there must be a traitor, that the Allies somehow infiltrated the inner sanctums of German radar research. In Berlin, General Martini, the Luftwaffe's chief of signals, reads each report with growing alarm. He circles key phrases. Phantom contacts. Signal instability. Unreliable range readings. Amplifier overload. He leans back in his chair, rubbing tired eyes. This is no coincidence. Yet he cannot state that openly. To admit the truth would be to acknowledge a catastrophic breach in Germany's technological security, so official directives continue to emphasize equipment malfunction and maintenance deficiencies. But in private, Martini orders the development of countermeasures. New filters, new sweep algorithms, experimental amplifiers, protective shielding. None of it works. The British jammers, improvised, ugly, barely held together by solder and luck, continue to blind the vaunted Würzburg system, night after night. In the skies, the effects are undeniable. Bombers that once weaved through deadly corridors of radar-guided flak now pass through eerily quiet sectors. Night fighters that once tore into bomber streams with precision now arrive minutes late, hunting empty sky. Entire German night fighting districts report no sightings, even as British aircraft rumble overhead in massive formations. A sergeant in a Würzburg crew near Brest voices what many now fear. They know our secrets, someone stole them. But senior officers dismiss him. No spies, no captured documents, no intelligence breaches. Impossible, they insist. The British lack the expertise. But the evidence is undeniable. The Luftwaffe's night defenses are faltering, quietly, steadily, disastrously. Back in England, Nissenthal receives a message from the Air Ministry. He's to report to a secure facility for a classified performance review of the latest jamming results. When he arrives, he is greeted by Dr. Butment, who holds a freshly printed graph with obvious excitement. "Look at this," Butment says, pointing to a series of red and blue lines. "These are German tracking errors over the past 3 weeks. They're increasing exponentially." Nissenthal studies the data. They still don't know it's deliberate. "Not a clue," Butment replies. "They think their sets are failing. Entire radar stations are being ordered to conduct maintenance checks every 48 hours." Nissenthal allows himself a deep breath, a moment of quiet satisfaction. This is what Bruneval was about. Not a trophy. Not a symbolic victory. A slow, grinding shift in the balance of the air war. A shift that Germany can't see. A shift Germany cannot admit even as it spirals. And as the TRE continues refining the technology, one thing becomes increasingly clear. The Würzburg radar, once Germany's sharpest weapon against British bombers, is now a liability. Summer 1942. A warm breeze sweeps across the airfields of eastern England, carrying with it the rumble of engines and the faint scent of aviation fuel. Along the perimeter of RAF Scampton, ground crews watch a formation of Lancasters climb into the orange dusk. Their silhouettes stretch across the clouds, massive, determined, unstoppable. In a small operations hut near the runway, Nissenthal stands shoulder to shoulder with Wing Commander Leon as the bombers bank east toward the German border. On a table beside them sits the latest version of Britain's radar deception suite, a sleek, reinforced unit far more advanced than the jerry-rigged prototypes of just a few months earlier. Leon taps the casing proudly. Hard to believe this started as a bag of stolen circuitry. Nissenthal exhales slowly. 30 minutes on a French cliff and now we're rewriting the rules. He isn't exaggerating. Across Europe, the effects of Operation Biting are now unmistakable. Night fighters turn blind hunters. Inside a German command post near Essen, Hauptmann Weiss paces behind the plotting table, frustration radiating off him. His night fighter Grupp has been scrambled 3 times in as many hours, each time chasing radar contacts that evaporated into nothing. A radar controller calls out helplessly, "Sir, the Würzburg is showing multiple targets, but they're not correlating with Himmelbit tracking." Weiss grits his teeth. "Is it the weather?" "Sir, with respect, it cannot be the weather this often." Another false contact flickers away. Weiss slams a fist onto the chart table. The Germans had once prided themselves on their seamless night fighting grid, the Himmelbett system, Würzburg radar stations handing targets to airborne night fighters with deadly precision. Now the entire network is wobbling, staggering under the weight of deception signals it cannot understand. The British do not need to destroy the radar sites. They simply need to make them lie. Bomber crews feel the change. At 0310, the first wave of Lancasters returns to RAF Scampton. This time, the sky behind them is empty, no night fighters, no closing engines, no sudden blossoms of tracer fire. A flight engineer climbs down the ladder, blinking in disbelief. Never seen anything like it, the sky was just quiet. Another crew reports, they tried vectoring fighters onto us, but every time they got close, they turned the wrong way. Inside the debriefing hut, officers scribble notes furiously. German radar response delayed by 7 minutes. Multiple enemy fighters circling without acquiring. Flak batteries firing at empty sky. Each report feels like a small miracle, and a confirmation that the technical fingerprints Nissenthal tore from Bruneval are now echoing across Europe. Berlin searches for answers. In a wood-paneled conference room deep within the Reich Air Ministry, General Martini faces a semicircle of senior officers. Charts on the wall show mounting discrepancies between radar sightings and actual air interception logs. One officer clears his throat. Herr General, could this be intentional interference? Martini hesitates. His silence says everything. Another officer leans forward. But how would the British know the Würzburg's operating characteristics? The design is classified at the highest level. Martini answers quietly, perhaps not as secure as we believed. A chill settles over the room. Operation Biting, barely mentioned in official dispatches, has become an unspoken specter haunting every conversation about the air war. Britain pushes further. In the months that follow, British engineers take the lessons from Bruneval and transform them into a growing arsenal of electronic warfare tools. At number 100 Group RAF, crews train on new deception techniques. Airborne screens designed to mimic bomber streams. Devices that generate false altitude signatures. Systems that imitate the echoes of entire phantom formations. What began as a desperate raid has evolved into a full-fledged strategic doctrine. Electronic warfare. The Germans coined the term Funkkrieg, radio war, never realizing the British were already mastering it. Nissenthal faces the weight of his contribution. One evening, months after the raid, Nissenthal stands alone on the quiet edge of Scampton's runway. The wind carries the familiar hum of engines being serviced in distant hangars. He has been recommended for a commendation, but he feels uneasy accepting it. Frost and the Commandos risked everything on the ground. Men died on those cliffs, and he himself had walked a mission knowing his own escort had orders to kill him if capture was certain. A figure approaches out of the gloom, Wing Commander Leon. "You're troubled," Leon says, though not unkindly. Nissenthal sighs, "I took pieces of machinery, others took bullets." Leon shakes his head. "Jack, what you carried out of Bruneval has saved hundreds, maybe thousands of aircrew. You didn't just steal equipment, you stole their certainty." He gestures to the night sky, "And you gave it to us." Nissenthal looks upward, watching a lone bomber cross the stars, unharassed and unseen. For the first time, he begins to understand the scale of what they accomplished. The air war turns. By late 1942 and into 1943, RAF bomber streams consistently punch through German radar defenses. Loss rates drop, target accuracy improves. Massive raids like those soon to come against Hamburg and the Ruhr become possible only because Germany's early warning and interception grid is fractured. Broken. Blinded. Beaten at its own game. And the fracture began with a single 30-minute raid along a lonely French cliff. Operation Biting. A moment in time that rippled outward, reshaping the trajectory of the entire air war. Winter 1943. Snow drifts across the parade ground of Stanmore Park HQ, settling in slow, lazy spirals on the shoulders of officers hurrying between buildings. Inside the command bunker, warmth radiates from humming radio sets and glowing plotting tables where controllers track the night's bomber streams. A large wall map displays arcs of German radar coverage lines that once represented near-impenetrable defenses. Now many of those arcs are crossed out, shaded, or marked with bold annotations indicating degraded or unreliable sectors. Air Vice Marshal Saunders stands at the center of the room, hands clasped behind his back. "Gentlemen, the Würzburg grid is collapsing faster than our analysts predicted," he says. "Their night fighters are losing cohesion. Their signals discipline is breaking down." He points to a sector near Bremen. Last night, British jammers created 47 Phantom bomber contacts. The Germans diverted 13 fighters to chase ghosts. Meanwhile, our real formation flew unchallenged across their flank. The officers around him exchange grim smiles. The tide has turned and they know it. At the far end of the room, quietly taking notes, stands Jack Nissenthal. He's been invited as an observer, though many here see him as something more. The man whose insight and whose courage on that cliff at Bruneval helped crack the Luftwaffe's electronic shield. A signals officer moves beside him. "Hard to believe this all started with a little raid, isn't it?" Nissenthal answers softly, "Nothing little about what those men did." Inside Germany, the unraveling continues. Hundreds of miles away, in a drafty Luftwaffe intelligence office near Berlin, engineers hunch over malfunctioning amplifiers and hand-drawn schematics of the Würzburg grease. Every table is cluttered with coils, tubes, and failed prototypes of anti-jamming filters. An officer bursts in, slamming a folder onto the desk. "Another report. The Würzburg at Le Havre lost tracking of an entire bomber stream. They claim all 24 blips vanished at once." A technician rubs his temples. "It isn't possible, not unless." The officer cuts him off. "Save it, High Command wants answers, not excuses." But there are no answers, not ones anyone dares voice. The truth is a quiet horror running through every radar station in occupied Europe. The British know how our radar works. They know how to blind it. They know how to deceive it. And it's our fault for underestimating them. But the admission stays unspoken. Better to blame weather. Or faulty wiring. Or incompetent operators. Anything but the truth. The Allies press their advantage. At Bomber Command HQ, planners finalize routes for an upcoming operation, one that will become infamous as the Battle of Hamburg. A staff officer draws a finger along the map. "These corridors will hold." German radar stations here and here collapse under mandrel pressure within 10 minutes. Another officer adds, "Night fighters will be scrambled blindly. They'll have no sector guidance." The room is thick with tension but also with confidence, the kind that had been unthinkable just a year earlier when bombers were dying in staggering numbers. A colonel leans over the table. "Gentlemen, the Germans won't just be blind tonight, they'll be deaf as well." The men nod. This is no longer a theory. No longer a field test. This is operational dominance. Nissenthal's quiet recognition. Weeks later, Nissenthal receives a discreet envelope delivered by hand. Inside is a commendation, formal, meticulously worded, the sort of document destined for archives and filing cabinets. But tucked behind it is a personal note from a senior RAF officer. "Your actions have altered the entire landscape of the air war. The enemy no longer sees us coming. And they never will again." Nissenthal reads it twice, then folds it carefully. He thinks of Frost. Of the men who sprinted down that cliff under fire. Of sailors pulling them onto boats in the freezing surf. Of the radar dish looming like a giant ear listening to the night sky. 30 minutes. A handful of components. A desperate gamble. And a war reshaped. The long shadow of Bruneval. By 1944, Germany's once feared radar network is a fractured shell of its former self. Jamming, spoofing, deception screens, British electronic warfare has become a symphony, battering the Luftwaffe from the inside out. During the D-Day landings, entire German radar stations report massive approaching formations that do not exist, while real Allied aircraft slip through unnoticed until it is far too late. Historians will later write that Germany never recovered from the blow delivered at Bruneval. Not because of explosions, not because of casualties, but because of knowledge. The knowledge stolen that night became a weapon, one more decisive than bombs or bullets. The final word. Years later, long after the war has ended, veterans gather at a reunion. Frost is there, older but still sharp-eyed. Some commandos walk with canes, others wear medals pinned to lapels. Nisenthal joins them quietly, receiving handshakes and backslaps. One veteran raises a glass. To Bruneval, the raid they never saw coming. Another adds with a grin. And the one they never truly understood. Nisenthal lifts his own glass, remembering the cold wind over the cliff, the German voices snapping awake in the night, the precious metal panels gripped in his trembling hands. 30 minutes, he murmurs, that's all it took. The room falls silent for a moment of reflection. Then Frost speaks, voice firm. 30 minutes that helped win a war.